Hey guys, welcome back. I see everybody's popping into the chat section. We want to thank you for joining us this afternoon on a Sunday afternoon. I have a special guest, Phil from GOA, but before we get started with today's video, I just want to take a quick moment to thank Big Daddy Unlimited for helping to make this video possible. And if you would, just swing by, check out BigDaddyUnlimited.com, and for just 99 cents, you can check them out and decide if you want to stay a member or not. With that being said, Phil, thank you for joining me on Sunday afternoon and helping us with our State of the Second.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Tim. Thanks a lot.
So if you guys don't know, there's a new thing that the Gun Owners of America is doing, and it's called the Minuteman Minute. I got that right, Phil?
Minuteman Moment.
Minuteman Moment. And I've been watching these videos myself, and instead of just getting email alerts, which I highly recommend everybody sign up to get from GOA, it's free, but you can watch this on their YouTube channel, and it's just a blast of information, short, concise, to the point, and it gets important information out there. We're going to touch on a few things in this video. As I'd mentioned in my previous video that we had done, we're not going to harp too much on politics on the Military Arms channel. We're going to do updates if something really dangerous pops up that we think requires your attention. We'll jump online and do a live stream such as this with Gun Owners of America, and we'll bring that information to your attention. Today, we just want to talk about some of the news items that are going around. There's nothing big and scary out there like HR127, which is just a bunch of hype. It's not something you need to be overly concerned with at the moment, but we've talked about that already. But we have a few other topics that keep coming up. I see in the comment sections of videos and stuff like that I think it's worth getting the information out there to you guys. Now, Phil works very closely with representatives and GOA members and stuff like that on the Hill. So he's literally on the Hill every day, knows what's going on, knows what's being discussed, knows what's pending and what's not pending. And with that being said, Phil, where would you like to start, man? I know that one of the big news items I've seen from GOA recently is the issue of Merrick Garland. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on with Merrick Garland and how that affects gun owners?
Sure. So a lot of your members may remember Merrick Garland from when he was nominated to be a justice on the Supreme Court. That was a couple years ago. We all successfully fought back and prevented that from happening, and we got a better justice in his place eventually. I think what people have to remember about every nominee that comes forward right now, from this administration, and I know you don't want to talk too much about politics, there is no such thing as a moderate nominee. It just won't pass muster, right? So Merrick Garland just had his hearing in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and your viewers may think that's not worth watching. I recommend they pop over to the website and just give it a few minutes, right? At least get accustomed to who this guy is and how he talks and what he thinks. The first thing I want to say just very generally about him is he is going to be very, very quick. And he more or less says this in his testimony. He is going to be very, very quick to lump in people like your viewers with domestic terrorists. These are the sorts of things he said, right? So that's just sort of where he's coming from. But I want to talk about some questions that were specifically asked of him in committee. So Senator Ted Cruz out of Texas had a very good exchange with him. Everybody on your channel is probably a big fan of the Heller case. And we all know what that's about. And so Senator Cruz said, Garland, if your nomination is confirmed, will your DOJ argue for the Supreme Court to overturn the Heller case? That would be pretty monumental.
That's huge.
So here's what he's...
Yeah, please, just for those people that are watching real quickly, I don't mean to interrupt, but Heller was a landmark decision for gun owners and gun rights and how the Second Amendment is viewed. And so to mess with that would be really, really bad. So go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, it would be absolutely devastating to take that back to the courts to try to overturn that. And so Senator Cruz said, would you argue with your DOJ for the Supreme Court to overturn the Heller case? And here's what he said verbatim. He said, look, the department makes all kinds of judgments like that. I can't promise, basically, that I won't argue for overturning Heller. I mean, in other words, he's saying that that would be on his wish list. Now, in any administration, in any DOJ, there's a lot of priorities that come up. And so there's a chance that they wouldn't get to that. There's a chance that they would. I guess what's most important for everybody listening right now and watching is that this is in his mind, that he would like to do something like that. And so that's one reason he's very dangerous. Another good exchange was with Senator Mike Lee out of Utah. And he said very point blank, and this is the sort of stuff we need to be asking these guys because they have difficulty answering them. He said, do you support banning certain types of firearms, right? It's not about a court case. It's not about a current law. Straight up, do you support banning certain types of firearms? And it's a little bit long, but if you guys will bear with me, I think it's worth everybody hearing this. He said, well, as I'm sure you know, the president is a strong supporter of gun control and has been an advocate all of his professional life on this question. The role of the Justice Department is to advance the policy program of the administration as long as it is consistent with the law. Where there is room under the law for the president's policies to be pursued, I think the president is entitled to pursue them, right? The question Senator Lee asked is yes or no.
Right.
Do you support banning certain types of firearms? That's a yes or no. That's a binary choice.
Right.
The answer that somebody who wants to try and ban certain types of firearms but can't outright say yes because he knows that it would cause a storm, he gives that answer. That's very important for people to recognize. That's not a, well, he doesn't care so much. That is a straight up, that's where he would like to go if the political climate allowed him. Again, maybe he never gets time to do it. Maybe other priorities take over, but that's where his head is at.
So should he be appointed to this position, what does that give him power over? What departments will he have control over? This is important, I think.
I mean, basically, he's the country's top lawyer, top cop. I mean, he
right.
has.
I mean, so in other words, I'm getting to ATF, right? So that takes me back to, we've already seen ATF try to make moves on braces, and through political action. I don't care what anybody says. It was through political action by our community that we stopped that, redetermination of their determination of a determination. If he's driving things like this, just as President Trump went to his ATF and said, make bump stocks go away, which is one of the reasons we're suing the government, is over that process. He's in that position now to help push his boss's anti-gun agenda, should he be appointed, through, giving direction to ATF, correct?
Yeah. GOA has some good paper put out on this. Garland, while a judge, had 4 opportunities that I'm aware of to side with the Second Amendment, and he took every opportunity to be on the wrong side of that one. Right. Yeah. So he's 0 for 4 on protecting the right. This is not a guy that we can trust going forward.
Right. And I'm seeing some interesting comments go by, guys. And if you tag me, it'll show up in a color. If you give us a super chat, that does help us here at the channel. Also, that puts it in a color where I can catch it. But there's some of the stuff that you guys are bringing up that we will talk about in this video. One commenter said, is this clickbait, or is, Biden doing something via executive order? No, it's not clickbait. We will talk about that because that's a very hot topic right now. So with regards, before we jump over to that, Phil, is there anything else you want to discuss about Merrick Garland and his potential appointment, or can we jump over to this one, because I know everybody is concerned about these executive orders?
Yeah, just one final thing, and again, this is in Garland's own words. Senator Lee again asked him a second question about holding firearms manufacturers legally liable for damage for basically a crime committed using one of their firearms, and he said, "This is again his words. I don't think it raises a Second Amendment issue itself." I mean,
yeah, I know. I watched him say that. I was listening to it. I was driving on satellite, and I heard him say that. And my jaw dropped. I mean, it's unbelievable. So, guys, this is where it gets into the potential, because even during the Obama years and certainly through the Trump years, there just wasn't an appetite in Congress to really go after firearms with sweeping bans and legislation. They're always going to go after the low-hanging fruit if they can. They're always going to capitalize on a national tragedy if they can. So like when we say there's nothing to worry about with HR127, it's a dead bill. That doesn't mean that bits and pieces of it might not be picked up by another bill that comes about because of a national tragedy, or they just get to the point where they think, well, maybe on this, this omnibus bill, we can stick in, a magazine ban and get it through. There's all sorts of stuff that can still happen that we need to be aware of. It's just that at this moment, there's no real appetite, and correct me if I'm wrong, Phil, in Congress to take on sweeping gun control measures at this moment. I keep stressing at this moment because we could turn on the news right now and some idiot can do something unspeakable that makes the 24-hour news cycle, and then we would be having a completely different conversation right now.
No, yeah, I totally agree. You're 100% right. At this moment, there's not an appetite to take that stuff on. Now, I'm sure someone's going to say, Phil and Tim, of course they have the appetite to do it. Well, yes, we know they want to. The fact is the political climate doesn't exist that it can give them the space to pass these sorts of sweeping gun bills like 127, right? It's going nowhere.
Yep. And that's strong. I strongly want to drive that home, guys. All this hype, all this fear that's being promoted right now about HR 127, it's a dead bill written by Sheila Jackson Lee. She's a lunatic. She's been proposing these bills that no Democrat will touch because not only are they unenforceable in the way that they're written, it goes too far, and they know because anti-gun forces, and Phil, I break things down in our videos between pro-gun and anti-gun versus Republican and Democrat, even though usually it's right down party lines, but the anti-gun forces don't want to lose their paper-thin majority that they have right now in both chambers. And I think that's going to play to our benefit going forward for the next 2 years. And depending on how things turn out in 2 years, we're going to have to reassess the landscape. But again, one major news cycle, national tragedy thing away from them racing something through in the middle of the night like they did Obamacare while passions are high. And that's something we have to keep an eye out for. But HR 127 is dead. Please don't buy into that hype.
Can I just say real quickly, somebody may be asking, well, how do you know whether or not 127 is a thing or not? How do you know whether one bill or another is not? There's no easy answer to that stuff. It's just, being here in DC, having like boots on the ground, having people who speak to staff and members on a daily basis, knowing how this place works. That's how you figure out what's real and what's not real, right? You can't do it from 100 miles away. You've actually got to be, in Congress, talking to people, sort of, talking to your networks and building on those relationships. That's how there's no, a magic, pill to this. It's hard work every day. So that's how we know that this is going nowhere. It's because we have those relationships and we can just, read the tea leaves.
See, that's where I was going to go. One of the reasons why I've aligned myself with Gun Owners of America is because not all gun rights groups are the same. There are some guys out there that are big chest thumpers. They get a lot of attention out there in social media, but they have no real presence in DC. They don't truly know what's going on, and many times they just get things wrong, or sometimes they purposely get things wrong to fundraise off fear, and you just got to watch out for that. So. That's one of the reasons I really enjoy working with GOA is because you guys have boots on the ground every day. You can walk into these offices, speak with these, representatives and realize, look, 127 has no co-sponsors. It can't even make it into committee. If it can't make it to committee, it's never going to make it to the House floor for a vote. And if it goes to the Senate, there's a couple of Democrats there that won't touch it either. So it doesn't even come down to a Kamala Harris tie-breaking vote. It just isn't going to make it right now in this current environment. Okay, I got to keep saying that because if something bad happens, people are going to come back and say, oh, Mac, you said that couldn't possibly happen, and it happened. Things change every single day, but where we're at right now. Okay, I'm just throwing up some super chats, gentlemen. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for the super chats. We are viewer supported, and I do want to thank you guys for doing that. So I'm throwing up the super chats on the screen so folks can read them. Please keep them polite. If I find any cursing or anything like that in there, I have to. I can't share that. This one just says, keep up the great work still. It's dead, but I'd rather watch everything possible because life is unpredictable. Exactly, and that's the message we're telling you guys. And HR 127 itself likely will never go anywhere, but that's not to say bits and pieces of it might not wind up in other legislation that will go somewhere, because there's things that Phil and I would call low-hanging fruit for the anti-gun forces, going after magazine bans, going after closing the gun show loophole, which we know is private sales. That's low-hanging fruit that they can get bipartisan support or get one or two Republicans to flip on in light of a news event or something like that they could go after. But, sweeping gun bans and Biden carrying out his desire to take your AR-15s away from you as he keeps promising, that's just not there right now. So I hope it stays that way. So that's a segue, Phil, into our next point here. I think this might be a question for you here really quick on a super chat. I do want to make sure I get the questions. Does the SCOTUS have the appetite to hear our CA cases, Rupp, Miller, and Duncan versus Barcera? I'm horrible with names. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about, Phil? These would largely affect block of the national gun control issues that we're discussing. Of course, what happens in California is kind of a test bed for what they might try to pull off in D.C. and other states. Are you familiar with what Chris is talking about there?
Not with all the details of those particular cases, but I think the question was about whether or not SCOTUS has the appetite. And I think Justice Thomas, he's a great justice. He probably does. The question is whether or not he can convince enough of his colleagues to take that one up. There was a case that they recently decided not to take up, and the name of it I can't remember right now, but he basically said, look, we haven't done anything since Heller, so let's get back into this, start sorting out the details, because that's one of the excuses that these lower courts are using with Heller, is saying there's not enough detail, or you guys sort of left it open to an interpretation, which for the most part isn't true, because they're outright misinterpreting intentionally the holding in Heller. And so what Thomas is basically saying is, let's take one of these cases that makes sense, and let's start patching up some of these holes that we have, so that there's some clarity here. So he definitely does. He's one of the best there is. The only question that's open is whether or not he can get enough of his colleagues to agree with him on that. Frankly, I'm not sure, but one thing to remember is justices, whether the Supreme Court or lower courts, are just like members of Congress. They're human, and they are open to political pressures like anybody else.
Yep. And are you familiar with the process by which the Supreme Court decides whether or not to hear a case?
I'm not. I think you may actually have some more experience in that area than I do. But
I believe it's just a simple. It's almost like a committee. They just kind of have a segment of the judges that take a look at the cases that are coming through, and it's kind of like a yes/no whether they're going to take it on or not. So it's just because something makes it to the Supreme Court,
right,
doesn't mean that it's gonna. Well, it'll be heard by the court, but you'll also have lower courts making decisions, and the Supreme Court will take a look at that decision. They may or may not agree with it, but if they don't decide to take it on, then they're going to let that decision stand. It doesn't mean that they agree with it. They may just think that there's not enough case law, if you will, to warrant them taking a deeper dive into the case, which may change. So the Supreme Court's kind of an interesting beast, and it's worth looking into and doing a little bit of reading on if you're interested in how they go about doing business. Now, I do want to get into this executive order stuff, because this is one of the reasons why I wanted to do today's State of the Second, because Joe Biden, no question about it, went out in front of the cameras and said, if I cannot get Congress to, push forward on my aggressive gun control agenda, I'm going to do it through executive action. I'm going to do it through executive fiat. He's made the threat. Now, the question is, what can he really do? Can he take executive action and cause gun owners a bunch of grief? He most certainly can. But in terms of like HR127, I see people tying the two together, executive action and HR127. There's nothing there that he can do to enact any part of HR127 through executive order. Phil, can you kind of fill us in what the feeling is, in DC right now, if he were going to take unilateral action and do something through executive fiat? What would be some of the things that he could target, and what could he pull off through executive action?
So this is going to be a theme that I'm going to come back to pretty consistently, probably today and any time in the future, is that at the end of the day, the final arbiter of these questions is always going to be Congress, right? anytime somebody says, Congress's hands are tied or they can't legislate, that's not really true. Congress always can find the answer. That's where the buck is supposed to stop. But to the point of executive orders, there's sort of a culture right now where we almost expect a president to take it upon himself to solve these problems, right? So, bump stocks is one we're all really familiar with. That shouldn't have been done that way. If it were to be done, there's a legislative process. And I think we'd all probably agree that even if they had legislated bump stocks away, that would have been unconstitutional in that regard. What we need to understand is sort of two things. One is that President Biden, to what you said earlier, he doesn't want to lose these majorities in the next couple of years, right?
Right.
So the idea that he's going to go out there and do some executive order, basically saying like, every federal agency has to report anybody who runs afoul of that agency to the NICS list, right? Which we've seen with the Social Security Administration, which we've seen with the Veterans Affairs agency, right? That's a little on the strong side, right? In a bad way, of course, right? But he could sort of do things like that. That's going to upset a lot of people, but then he's got to consider whether or not there's going to be repercussions for that in 2022 and then 2024. And so there's also obviously things we've talked about like pistol braces. There's more nefarious things that the ATF has done with its interpretation of things like mental defective and how that relates to the actual language in the Gun Control Act. Basically he could direct some of these agencies. He doesn't have to write an executive order himself, right? He could always direct the agencies to take a more aggressive posture themselves against some Second Amendment issues which fall into their purview, which the people watching and listening right now may not know how many agencies actually have some kind of jurisdiction or responsibility over aspects of the Second Amendment. There's Health and Human Services, the Department of Health and Human Services. They even have some sort of jurisdiction over the Second Amendment. So it's all over. He doesn't necessarily have to be the bad guy, which makes all of this much more complicated. He doesn't have to do an executive order. He could direct them to just take a harder line against folks in these agencies.
Yeah, and this is something that we've touched upon before in previous streams. There's a little thing called Chevron deference, which is a hotly contested thing that everybody wants the Supreme Court to make a decision on in their favor. But in essence, kind of the Cliff Notes version of Chevron deference is that Congress will pass these really nebulous laws that aren't clearly defined. And that's the fault of Congress. And then they hand these down to the enforcement agencies like the BATF, and then they're given great latitude into how to interpret the law. So in essence, in the case of the ATF, many times they can do things like make new law through interpretation or reinterpretation of what Congress has said. If you take a look at a perfect example of that, we had the law that passed Congress and was signed in a bill that passed Congress and signed into law that banned armor-piercing handgun ammunition. Poorly written law, and to the ATF's favor, so they could do anti-gun things. So they decided, okay, well, if a pistol can fire a rifle caliber, that's armor-piercing, and therefore we're going to ban that armor-piercing ammunition like M855, which has an exemption right now, but 7 and 6, which is banned from import now because it has a steel core, and it's a rifle caliber. Two of the sponsors of that bill even wrote ATF and said, what you're about to do violates the spirit of the law. That's not our intent with the law, and the ATF ignored them and went ahead with the 7 and 6 ban. So that's what Chevron deference is. It's the regulatory agencies that really can do pretty much anything they want. And I've seen other commentators say, they always got to report up the food chain, and this is just crazy to say that the ATF has gone rogue. That's impossible. It falls at the feet of the Attorney General. And no, the Attorney General doesn't micromanage every single branch office and every single determination that these agencies make in the field. And so it really is many times without much higher level oversight. They're making some of these decisions on their own. Perfect case of this would be what a field office did with the Q brace on the honey badger. That was a field office doing that. That didn't come down from the Attorney General. That was a field office. So anyway, the executive order stuff, the president can act on things like sanctions and imports. He can, ban the importation of ammunition with the stroke of a pen. He could ban the importation of, rifles out of Europe with the stroke of a pen. These are things that could all be challenged in court, and that the previous or the next administration could potentially undo, much like what Biden's doing right now, going through and undoing a bunch of Trump's executive orders. The next president, if they're truly pro-gun, we apply enough pressure, could go through and undo anything that Biden might do through executive action. When Congress acts, it tends to be a little bit more permanent. And some executive orders have stuck around for decades now, and they're probably never going to go anywhere. They're just now law, de facto law. So I wanted to bring up this, maybe you know a little bit about it, Phil. I have a super chat that says, Rhode Island Gun Control Act is calling for banning of any firearm that uses a magazine with a removable base pad, among other BS. Please help. I'm not familiar with what goes on in every single 50 of our states. And, so I can't speak to, I get questions about various laws and stuff happening in all the other various states. Do you have any insight as to what's going on in Rhode Island, and some advice on how people can get more active to fight these things at the local level?
I don't know the particulars of this piece of legislation in Rhode Island, but this is something I think is really important. Some of our best wins right now on the Second Amendment are coming from the state level. I don't know if this is something you want to get into a little bit later or dive into it right now.
Let's hit it now, because it's something we had discussed pre-show. So let's go ahead and let's talk about it.
Yeah, I think the real benefit of what you can do at the state level is that your state senator, your state congressman, you actually might know them, right? Like, you may send your kids to the same school. You may sort of live near them. These, just by the fact that they still live there every day of the week rather than fly to Washington, they are much more susceptible to the pressures of the state that can be brought down on them. We've seen, 17 states that have constitutional carry now.
Every year we get more.
Yeah, we get every year we get more. There's a lot of powers that the states have if they're willing to exercise them. We're seeing states doing things like, hey, we won't enforce federal gun control. Well, how do you do that, right? It's one thing to say it. It's another thing to exercise it. So in practice, what that means is that you, as a governor, as a state legislator, you just won't let your state resources be used to enforce federal law. And you may think to yourself, okay, well, then a federal agency will just come in and do it. They don't have the manpower. They simply don't. They need those state resources to execute on some of these federal laws. And so when you say we're not going to, support your federal law, okay. And then they could try to do it on their own, and more likely than not, they're going to give up. But some of the best work is being done at the state level, and we're definitely involved in a lot of those issues as well. It's sort of, one feeds off of the other.
Yep, and folks, many times folks look to us to do everything for them, or look to gun rights groups to do everything for them. There's nothing stopping you from getting involved at your own state level. I'll use myself as an example. Myself and two of my friends started the Indiana Citizens Defense League. We just recently got our nonprofit status. We're working with our friends over at GOA. They've been very helpful in helping us get that set up. And then we modeled it off the Virginia Citizens Defense League. They were instrumental in helping us, navigate that process so we become a nonprofit and do that. And what is the purpose of the Indiana Citizens Defense League? It's to fight for pro-gun laws and pro-gun issues here in the state of Indiana. And I urge people, there's to become politically active. It certainly is good to make a phone call to a representative when you're opposing something or supporting something. It's definitely good to write them an email and, faxes if you still do those types of things. But there's other things you can do at the state level. And like Phil's touching upon, the states have the ability to stand up to the federal government. Now, there's certain things that states are doing which are mostly symbolic. They're passing, 2A sanctuary states and counties where they're saying we're going to arrest federal agents if they try to enforce federal laws in the state. Due to the supremacy clause in the way the Constitution's structured, that's not going to play out very well for those states. But what they can't do, what the feds can't do, is come into your state and force your state police, your county officers, and your municipality officers to enforce federal laws. They can't make them do that or punish them for not doing it. So it's a little bit more than symbolic, as long as you focus on those state issues and you elect state representatives that reflect your Second Amendment values and other values, of course. I tend to be a single issue voter, but I have other things I'm passionate about. But it's really critical, because we've had such great success at the state level, that we don't just focus at the federal level, because, if we're trying to get pro-gun things done at the federal level, it's almost impossible. That usually comes through the courts, like the Heller decision. But we can actually get pro-gun legislation passed at the state level because we do it every single year. And you guys out there watching this right now have the power to do that. It doesn't take another leader. You can become that leader, or at least seek out an organization within your state. Because when we were looking, for the Indiana Citizens Defense League name and making sure we weren't stepping on somebody else's toes before we incorporated, I found out that many states already have such organizations. And so find those organizations, seek them out, become a member, and become politically active, show up at rallies, and do things at the state level, and you're going to be extremely surprised at how effective you can be.
Yeah, GOA has state leaders and state volunteers all over the country. And so it's just a matter of finding those people. I mean, they'll be able to plug you into what's going on. I think people need to ask themselves one question. If putting pressure on state or federal politicians didn't work, why do the anti-gunners do it, right? There is billions, literally billions of dollars being poured into these efforts. And the people funding them, they may be, dumb on the Second Amendment, but they're not dumb people. They know that their money, for every dollar they put in, they're getting X amount back in terms of gun control, or at least an attitude from state and federal legislators that, is sort of favorable to anti-gun positions. Yep.
All right. So one of the other, I just popped up a super chat from Phil. It's a comment. How about a 10-year residency requirement for new immigrants to vote in state and local elections? Californians are turning Nevada AZ, Texas, Idaho blue. Again, this goes back to what you can do at the state level. I don't know of any such law in a state that requires that, and that might be unconstitutional, but there are things that you can do to try to shield yourself from these anti-gun groups that may be, and people that might be moving into your state. They make a mess for themselves in the state that they live in. They don't like paying the high taxes. They don't like the schools that are horrible. They don't like the crime. And it's all because of their own policies. They blame it on somebody else, move out of state to where they have good schools, low crime, and low taxes, and then they vote in the same mess. And it's just like that, dropping a pebble in a pond. It's just a rippling effect of, political stupidity that just ripples out and destroys, more and more communities. But anyway, so I have a couple other things here as action items. We're about halfway through the show, folks. We try to keep this to an hour, and we have about a half hour left here. Let's see. Had a couple of things. So we've touched upon the executive orders. Guys, if you have any questions about the executive order stuff that we didn't touch upon, please bring it up, because it is very important. I want to make sure that everybody understands that, yes, Biden can take unilateral action through executive order, but his hands are mostly tied as to what he can do. He can make it painful for us. He can make it difficult to get ammunition and get import firearms and cause prices to go up through actions like that. But he's not going to be able to ban guns through executive order. So anybody telling you that, or that he's going to push HR127 through via EO, it's just not true. It's not possible.
One thing to remember about executive orders is that, again, to your point, they're not creating new law. It's his administration's interpretation of an existing law, right? So every administration needs to, administer a law. So then it becomes a question of, how does my administration think it should be administering this law? And that's where you get the executive order from. It's not a new law. It's an interpretation of existing. Sometimes they're more forgiving than others.
So what's are you aware of any legislation currently pending in the House or the Senate that has anything to do positively, I already know the answer to that one, or negatively with regards to gun control? Anything that they're trying to slip through on another bill, something they might try to stick into a stimulus package? Is there anything out there that our viewers should be aware of or concerned with at the moment?
So I actually always like to look on the positive because there's a lot bad out there. So the positive stuff keeps us going. There are many good bills that are filed by good members, right? And so we probably know who they are. In the Senate, there's, Mike Lee comes to mind. He's always a good Second Amendment supporter. Ted Cruz is good on these things. And so I'm not sure if he has anything filed right now, but certainly he's one to look at. In the House, I hope your viewers are watching what's going on in the House right now with some of these new members that are there. They are phenomenal. There's a few of them that I just want to mention because your viewers should be paying attention to. One is Marjorie Taylor Greene out of Georgia, and the other is Lauren Boebert. And there's a few others that are just rock solid, and they get it. And they have Lauren Boebert obviously is pretty well known at this point because of what she was doing on carrying a firearm in the Capitol, which ignited a storm of Nancy Pelosi putting up magnetometers in order for members to go vote, which probably is unconstitutional. I think that's a bit of an open question because the House can make its own rules. But what she did by pushing the issue, right? So this is an important way for everybody to look at sort of tactically how we do things.
And if you could, Phil, let me interrupt one brief moment because some folks might not know the backstory on this one. It's such a great story. Can you kind of start off, at the beginning of the story and then finish up with what you were going to talk about there?
Sure. So Lauren Boebert is a freshman congresswoman out of Colorado, from of all places, the town of Rifle, Colorado, and
great name.
A great name. And she, being sort of a person from, she's famous because her restaurant, everybody open carries. I think it's called Shooters or Shooters Bar, Shooters Grill or something like that. It's a neat name. And she's accustomed to carrying a firearm for her protection, like a lot of people are. And so when she came to D.C., she saw that it, for lack of a better term, wasn't the safest place in the world. And so she wanted to carry a firearm. Now, in D.C., you actually can conceal carry. Luckily, there is that, and again, because of the courts.
Right.
The problem is she could only carry a firearm, assuming she got her license, and she has. She could carry her firearm from where she lives in D.C. to, let's say, a block or two from the Capitol, but then no further, right? And so, effectively, working in Congress, that nullifies her right to carry, because what's she going to do? Stash her gun in the bushes while she's at work? Like, she can't do
right.
that. Right? So what she fought for, she said, well, I am a law-abiding American, and I have a right to carry a firearm as enshrined in the Constitution, so I want to carry it. And she pushed, and she made noise, and she refused to take no for an answer. And and that's what sort of brings us to the question of Nancy Pelosi with those magnetometers. Pelosi, was, let's say, concerned that members are going to be carrying firearms on the House floor. Why? I don't know.
And Nancy Pelosi is surrounded by armed people all the time. So why does she trust some armed people in her presence, but not others? This royalty mentality these people have is just mind-numbing.
Well, it's just to make people who want to carry firearms for personal protection, look bad. It's the old wrestling term kayfabe, right? It's all for show. It's all one big show from Pelosi's standpoint. Like, she knows that putting the magnetometers up, A, members of Congress don't like it, and B, it might be unconstitutional to fine them at $5,000 a pop for violating that. And so Lauren Boebert pushed and pushed and pushed to carry a firearm, and in response, the magnetometers went up. But tactically, what we need to be thinking about, and this goes to the question of what people can do when you don't take no for an answer, when you're resilient, when you're fighting for a cause you believe in, you can push people to a point where they will reveal their true intentions and how they feel about you. Nancy Pelosi just showed the entire Congress and the country that she thinks her own colleagues, might do something violent. That's a pretty big tell right there. Like, that doesn't make her look quite as bipartisan or as nice as it would otherwise. So Lauren Boebert needs to be commended. Also, as I said, Marjorie Taylor Greene is another one who's been great on the Second Amendment. She's dropped a couple great things as far as the ATF and not funding some of their activities going forward. She's getting a lot of friends in Congress for standing up not only for herself, but also for the Second Amendment. She's drafted a wonderful piece of legislation about funding for ATF activities, and I encourage people to get in touch with her office and thank her for that, because they need, like I said earlier, they're people, and they need to hear attaboys every now and then. So, take a look at what she's done on that, and thank her for what she's doing. She'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I agree. And it's such a great story. We have some comments going by. I'm throwing up a few super chats. Joe Weber just brought up House Bill 1369. I believe that's a state bill. Not familiar. I've seen the bill number, but I'm not familiar with more context, Joe, what you're talking about there. One of the things, let's see, I saw somebody bring it up in a comment. Oh, yes, Tommy built rifles. I don't know if you're familiar with what happened there. So, I do want to touch upon this. And this is a classic ATF flip-flop. So Tommy Built was making rifles he called the T-36, which were American-made G-36 semi-automatic rifles. And if I recall, he had permission from ATF, because to manufacture a firearm, typically it's wise to get ATF approval before you go into mass production. And he had been producing these rifles for years. Well, an importer decided to bring in a pistol version of the HK-243, which is the semi-automatic G36 that I had a chance to take a look at when I was in Europe. I believe it was in Switzerland. I had seen one on a gun rack shelf and was playing with it. It was in flat dark earth. I even posted, I think, on Instagram, me holding it, thinking, wow, the Swiss can own this and I can't. And anyway, so somebody was trying to import those HK-243 civilian semi-automatic rifles as pistols into the United States, which has been successfully done with other firearms in the past. And the ATF said no. And the person trying to import it pushed the issue with the ATF and said, it's no different than the approval you gave Tommy Built, and it's no different than the SL8 that HK brought in, decades ago. It's the exact same blocks and stuff, the preventive measures to keep them from turning it into a machine gun. And these other two items, why won't you let us do it? And instead of ATF going, oh, you're right, these other two guns we did allow, they said, okay, Tommy Built, you have to cut up your receivers, and HK, we're just going to pretend like it didn't happen. So that goes back to what we're talking about, Chevron deference and agencies doing rogue things. I can assure you that didn't go to the Attorney General when they decided to ban the Tommy Built receivers. That was something that was done, by a group of agents or a lawyer with an ATF that just decided to change their mind. It doesn't require the head of the Department of Justice to sign off on every single determination that the ATF makes. They empower people below them. It's just like any other corporation. So that's a mess, and that's what we're talking about here in terms of things Biden can do. If he can get a head of the DOJ that is staunchly anti-gun, that head of the DOJ can hand down edicts to his departments under his control and do things like what was done to Tommy Built and other things. So it does pose a very clear and present danger. So anyway, if you have anything to say on that, Phil, I just that was something I wanted to bring up. I haven't done a video about it. Other content creators have, and I think it's it's kind of important.
No, I think you're spot on. I wouldn't add too much more to that, other than to remind people that whenever the ATF says something, it's not permanent. It's not law. Right. And as I said, that's the theme I'm always going to come back to, is that Congress has the supremacy here. They are where the answers should be found at the federal level, to the extent that they have competence in a certain area. And certainly there are open questions here, and they're the ones that can fix this. That's permanent until you change the law. But if we're waiting for agencies to fix things, or even if we get a president we like in there, and heck, even if we got an ATF director that we really liked, nothing that the ATF does is permanent. The only permanency is Congress. That's where we need to be putting a lot of our resources, and that's what we're doing. Yep.
And ATF historically has been all over the place. I could go back to the Atkins accelerator, where it was approved and then it wasn't approved, and then you had to either surrender, destroy your Atkins stock, or send a little spring that made the whole receiver and barrel assembly move forward and basically bump fired the gun. I think it was originally made for 1022, and he was hoping to do it for the SKS. ATF flip flopped on that. They've tried to flip flop on braces, and So yes, it's something that we have to be aware of. Yes, it's something that GOA and something I'm always watching out for, because Trump set a very, very bad precedent in what he did and how he did it with regards to bump stocks. The reason why our GOA case is still pending and the others have been thrown out of court already is because the other arguments didn't get at the core of what was going on. I've been saying this since the beginning. It's not about the stocks. It's not about the bump stock. It's about what was done and how it was done that is unconstitutional and illegal. You can't just, I don't want to get too far into it because we've done it in so many other live streams, but it's never been about the stocks. It's been about overreach by bureaucracies and bureaucrats and politicians doing things through back channels that take Congress out of the loop. And you would think Congress would be immensely upset with this because basically they're backdooring Congress and usurping their authority. And so that's why our case is still pending, because that's the argument we're making. And it's and who knows, maybe that's the one that takes the Chevron deference and we finally get a decision made on that one, which would be absolutely huge. So we got a super chat from Ron. And he says, does it concern you that we rely on soccer moms in Congress to defend our rights? These aren't the best and brightest. I'm not going to get into, personally insulting Congress people. Look, Congress reflects our society as a whole. We have good and bad people that live in our towns, that live in our counties, that live in our states, and you get some real dingbats. I don't remember the legislator's name who was questioning an admiral about if they put too many Marines on an island, if it would tip over. I mean, no, they're not the brightest always in Congress, right? So you get some really, really goofy people in there. And so, yeah, I mean, that's just what it is. I mean, I look at most of the presidential candidates, and every election cycle, I think, out of 350 million Americans, is this really the best? Is this really the cream of the crop? I mean, I just don't get it sometimes. But that's our republic, and I fully support our republic. I believe our system of government is better than any other system of government, which is why I want to fight, so judiciously to defend it. Because we can't have it dismantled, which is what the anti-gun forces are going for. And the same forces going for our Second Amendment rights are also going for our First Amendment rights, our Fourth Amendment rights. It's not just the Second Amendment they're attacking. We talk about the Second Amendment here a lot because we're a gun channel, but there's a lot more to it. And I'm just looking for some super chats here, Phil. Just want to make sure I don't miss any. Thought I saw, yep, there's a couple that popped up. All right, so here we have a comment from Roland. It says, this is why it's not worth seeking ATF approval letter for semi-auto designs. I've been there, done that. It's worthless, and it's not worth the paper it's written on. And, that's true. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to give legal advice. But, yeah, I mean, many times, and here's another mistake that people oftentimes make. So-and-so will write ATF and get a letter, and that letter may say, yes, oh yeah, you can put that stock on that pistol, and we won't consider that to be an SBR. Somebody else will go look at that letter and go, hey, look, there's a letter out there that says, Joe Blow can go do this, and I can go do it now based on his letter. It doesn't work that way. Unless that letter is written and addressed to you, it only protects the person it's written and addressed to. And even if it protects them.
And who made that rule?
Who made that rule?
Who made that? Who decided that?
I believe that was arbitrarily decided by ATF themselves.
There we go. Yeah.
Let's see. Okay. Just throwing up some super chats here. We're getting pretty close to the end of our hour, but I want to make sure I answer folks' questions. Many Filipinos support the Second Amendment. Americans must not let the 2A or other rights be taken from them. Hope is all but lost if America allows this to happen. Sorry, guys, I'm having a hard time today. I agree. I have Patreons, for example, that live in other countries, and one gentleman I correspond with regularly lives in Malta, and they can own machine guns over there. And, he tells me about a new gun that he's purchased, and I'm just in awe. We consider ourselves the land of the free, and we're anything but. In Europe, you can go buy an HK G36 as a 243, and all they've done is just put a semi-automatic trigger pack in it. All the nonsense we have to go through of blocking the receiver and making it so you can't put a trigger pack in the lower and all this crazy stuff our own government makes us do just to get a gun onto the market. That doesn't even happen in the Czech Republic. They can take a machine pistol and just put a semi-automatic trigger in it and sell it as a semi-automatic handgun. And they even have concealed carry in the Czech Republic, I found out. But if there's anything that pops in your head, Phil, bring it up. We're coming up towards the end here. I'm just looking for super chats because I want to thank everybody that's supporting us via super chat. I want to make sure that I get to your comments and your questions here. Let's see. I'm tired of the legislation being passed without our blessing under the guise of state emergency. That's another big issue. Can you speak a little bit about that, Phil?
Oh yeah. So that is one of the biggest problems we're facing right now, because when there's an emergency, nobody likes to look at the details, right? So let's say you have a bill, and let's keep the numbers manageable, right? Let's say it spends $100, right? And there is a hurricane that has passed through the southeast part of the country. So let's, maybe $40 of that $100 is dedicated to hurricane relief, and it's an open question whether or not that's constitutional. But let's say $40 is dedicated to that hurricane relief. There's $60 still left over, and you have to ask yourself, where's that going to? Well, it's going to all kinds of pet projects. It's going to federal agencies to dole out grant money for things that are totally unrelated to hurricane relief. It could be, grants for, a new computer program. It could be science grants, medical grants, to elite universities, right? So, but at the end of the day, everybody can still say we passed that emergency relief. No, and you see it happen all the time.
We see it with the stimulus. With the previous stimulus bills, there's still billions of dollars sitting out there unspent, and they're talking about passing another $2 trillion bill. And 80% of that has absolutely nothing to do with COVID stimulus. It has to go into the endowment for arts and humanity, and Planned Parenthood, supporting that, and all sorts of stuff, everything other than COVID. And that's why it's so important that you don't just watch a news channel, because we were having this pre-show conversation. It doesn't matter if it's Fox, MSNBC, Newsmax. I don't care who you watch. It's all politically spun in one direction or the other. You really have to do your research if you truly want to be politically active, because there's a lot of stuff that goes on out there that's really underhanded and dirty. And ultimately, our children are going to pay the price for this, because we're going to lose our rights, and our entire economy is built on a house of cards that could fall at any moment. And we really need to not just take that 30,000 foot view that's given to you with spin from your favorite news source. Really, please, if you want to be truly effective in helping to build and protect our republic and the values and the rights that we have, it's going to take a little bit more than watching Newsmax or Fox News or CNN for 20 minutes every evening.
Yeah, I can tell your listeners right now that this COVID bill that's coming up right now is one of the best examples of that question that just came up. It's emergency spending. There is some language in there to address the issue, but there is a lot of it which has nothing to do with it. And when I say nothing, I don't mean it's like medicine or medical related. I'm talking about grants for all kinds of things that wouldn't pass under normal circumstances and have nothing to do with the current situation. But it's an emergency, and they can shoehorn it through using the fear and moving things through quickly. It happens all the time. The question's 100% valid, and it's probably the one way that things get done anymore. Quite frankly, is everything at the last minute. It's 10 minutes to midnight. Government's about to shut down. And then it becomes a binary choice for members of Congress. Do you want to vote for this bill, which has very little to do with keeping the government open and has a lot of pet projects? Or do you want to be the guy responsible for shutting the government down for a day or 2 days or a week? It's unfair, and it's not a smart way to legislate. It only leads to bad outcomes.
Yep, I agree. We do have a question here, and it's a question that's asked us: passing laws against the Constitution and Bill of Rights make our government tyrannical? So I forget which justice said it. I believe it was in the early 1800s. Any law that would be passed by Congress that's repugnant to the Constitution, you have no obligation to follow that law. Now, every action has consequences. You can, let's just say that they ban AR-15s tomorrow and you decide you're not going to comply because that's repugnant to the Constitution. I fully believe such a ban would be repugnant to the Constitution. So I stand my ground and I don't turn my gun in. Well, they come in, kick my door in, and take my gun and take me and haul me off to jail. Well, now I got to fight that in court. So yes, governments can behave in such ways that violate our rights. But we have our founding fathers put mechanisms in place for us to challenge those things. That's why we have the court system, the federal court system. So, does the fact that our government pass laws that infringe on our rights make that government tyrannical? Everybody's definition of tyrannical is different. Do I think we, right now at this moment, need a civil war? Absolutely not. We're nowhere near that. It's something that each individual is going to interpret differently when it comes to, hot topic words such as tyranny and tyrannical. I don't know if you want to throw in your 2 cents there on that one.
I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that the founders gave us mechanisms to deal with these problems, and they gave us the mechanisms, but they never gave us the answers, right? This is a messy process. And so to your viewer's question about tyrannical laws, okay, let's say that AR-15s were somehow banned tomorrow. There are states that can say we won't follow those laws. And those states that decide not to, well, then those suddenly become bastions of liberty, right? That's how this process is supposed to work out. That's not my ideal outcome. It's not yours, and it's not the viewers either. But this is inherently a messy process. It's up to us to enforce the sort of country we want to live in. So I would say we are blessed to have all these different mechanisms available to us, whether it's the courts, whether it's the federal government, whether it's the state government, whether it's the local government, right? So, there's a lot you could do just in your own community to push back against the state that is doing all sorts of things you don't like, whether it's California or New York or DC or, if it's Chicago's outsized influence in Illinois. There's a lot you can do in your community to push back against some of these things. And that's the blessings of federalism.
We have about 4 minutes left in the show, but I just wanted to point out, to kind of further expand upon what you were saying there. Take a look in recent history what happened in Colorado. So the state legislature passed a law making 30-round magazines illegal, and then a bunch of sheriffs came together and said, we're not enforcing this law. A bunch of constitutional sheriffs decided, we're not going to enforce the law that the state passed. And so you'll see people blatantly ignoring that law in Colorado. And so the same thing can happen at the federal level. If the feds say that you need to turn in your AR-15, I live in and around counties that I've already talked to sheriffs that said we're not enforcing those laws. So that gives us some breathing room to fight these things through the mechanisms given to us by our founding fathers. But you take a look at, I think it was Connecticut. Post Sandy Hook, they wanted to force registration of all AR-15 owners, and they had massive non-compliance. Massive. I think it was something like 2% of the people even responded to it. And so, it's that type of non-compliance that we need to band together. If they do things like that we still have a voice, we still have the power to fight back and push back. And I'm a strong advocate for peaceful non-compliance. If they do something like that, band together and fight every way you can. And I advocate for doing so peacefully until, there's no other choice. Let's hope that we never get to that point. We have one super chat here. We're going to tie things up. We have 2 minutes left. We need a peaceful divorce. All gun laws are an infringement, period. Secession, people say that was resolved in 1865. It actually wasn't. There's no law that was written or amendment to the Constitution that was made that said secession is illegal. Do I think it's a good idea? That's a debate for another channel or another time. But, the peaceful divorce was tried once, and it wasn't so peaceful. But, yeah. All right. With all that being said, Phil, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your Sunday afternoon to come and share some insight. Hopefully we've interjected some, rational, thought and conversation into a lot of, hype and hyperbole and fear I see going on out there right now online with regards to what's happening legislatively or through executive orders. We are not saying that bad things aren't going to happen or can't happen in the next 2 to 4 years. They most certainly can. What we're saying is, please be informed before you go out there and start freaking out about things. Because if you call up your congressman and say, I strongly oppose HR127, and the congressman, like, what is HR127? It's not even in committee. That goes straight in the trash can. You keep doing that over and over and over again, your voice becomes less impactful. It's the boy that cries wolf so many times. We have to have targeted responses to threats that are real. And I trust GOA to bring those threats to us through the new show that you guys are promoting, which I think is awesome, the Minuteman Moment, and also just for signing up for the free email alerts. But I also highly recommend joining GOA. I do, so I pay every month to GOA. I don't just do a 1-year thing. I don't do a lifetime membership. I pay every month, and it's, I think what you guys call it, the Patriot support or something like that. So I highly recommend supporting groups like GOA. How can folks get a hold of GOA, Phil, and how can they become active? I know you guys have links on your pages so you can contact representatives very easily, things like that. Can you tell folks how to get in touch with GOA?
Sure. So, obviously you can go to gunowners.org. It's probably the quickest way to go there. Then there's a little button right at the top they can hit to join, and that's probably the quickest and best way to do that. Obviously, you can look up our new show, Minuteman Moment, and see what we're doing there. We have at least one a week is what we put up, and maybe we're looking at maybe doing a couple more because folks seem to like it.
I will try to keep liking them, because when I like them on my feed at the bottom of my channel, you'll see them pop up every week. So I'm going to try to remember to like them after I watch them, so that my viewers can scroll down to the bottom of my YouTube channel and see the videos that I'm liking and watching. All right, guys, we have completed 1 hour. It goes by awfully fast. Phil, I want to thank you, man, for, again, taking time out of your Sunday afternoon and away from your family to have this conversation with us. I want to invite you back, or anybody else back from GOA. If something pops up, Jordan knows how to get a hold of me. Eric knows how to get a hold of me, and we'll immediately make a video to, rally the troops and go take on any battle that presents itself. But right now, guys, just stay vigilant. Make sure that you sign up for those email alerts. And yeah, that's the best we can do right now. And if something bad really pops its head up, we'll be sure to try to get that information out to you as quickly as we possibly can. Phil, is there anything that you'd like to say before we sign off?
It was a real pleasure, and I'm glad I could join you and your viewers today.
All right, man, it was great, and you're welcome back anytime. Guys, if you'd like to support us here at the Military Arms Channel, we are supported by you. We've built a great community over on Patreon. So if you want to swing by Patreon, check out our Patreon family. Join us over there. We got early access to videos, and you got direct access to me. I answer all private communications, and it's not one-sentence responses. I type paragraphs. That's why it takes me a little while to get through all my emails. So please consider supporting us over there on Patreon. Also right here on YouTube, under the little video player you're watching right now, there's a little join button. Give it a click, and you can support us right here on YouTube. Thank you for 13 years of support. Thank you for watching these broadcasts, and spread them, share the links. If somebody's talking about HR127 or executive orders, just pop this link into that discussion, be it on a discussion forum or Facebook post, and hopefully it'll answer those questions from folks like Phil here, who actually have an idea of what's going on in DC. All right, guys, thank you for that 13 years of support. We'll be back for another State of the Second very, very soon. Thanks for watching.